The phone rang while I was counting the pills in my hand. 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon, 1 at night. That's how old age teaches you time, through medicine, not memories. I was putting the last bottle back when the screen lit up with my son's name. I smiled before I answered. Parents do that, even when they shouldn't. Hello, I said, is everything all right? He didn't answer right away. I could hear breathing, distant voices, a television in the background, life happening without me. Dad, he finally said, I wanted to talk to you about Christmas. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed steady. I was thinking about that too, I replied. I can come a day earlier if you want. The silence on the other end grew heavy. Then he said it. This Christmas, I hope you don't come. The words were calm, almost polite. That made them worse. Before I continue, if this story has reached you during a quiet moment or a long night, take a second to stay with me. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment about where you're listening from. It means more than you know. Now let me tell you what led to that call. I sat down slowly, afraid my knees might give out. I'm sorry, I asked, even though I had heard him clearly. It's not about you, he said quickly. Things are just different now. My wife thinks it would be best. Less tension, you understand, right? Understand. That word has been used to bury more parents than any cemetery. I understand, I said, because old men learn early that arguing only makes people leave faster. He sounded relieved. Good, we'll talk after the holidays. After the holidays. That's what people say when they don't plan on calling. The line went dead, leaving me alone with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the ticking clock that had outlived my wife, my strength, and now, apparently, my place in my son's life. I looked around the room. One chair, one table, one framed photo turned face down because I couldn't bring myself to look at it anymore. In that picture, my son was 10 years old, missing a front tooth, laughing like the world was safe. I had worked 2 jobs to keep food on our table, skipped meals so he could eat, walked miles in the rain when the car broke down, told myself every sacrifice was worth it because one day he would have a better life. He did. Just not with me in it. Outside, snow began to fall, slow, quiet, uncaring, the kind of snow that makes the world look clean even when it is. I pressed my hand against the cold window and let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. They thought this cold would break me. They thought an old man pushed aside at Christmas would fade quietly into the background. But they didn't know what I had already survived. They didn't know what I had already planned. And they certainly didn't know what that one-word answer really meant. Because when I said, okay, I wasn't giving up. I was preparing. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the slow creak of the house settling like it was breathing with me. Every sound felt louder when there was no one else around to hear it. My son's words replayed again and again, not as anger, but as something worse, finality. This Christmas, I hope you don't come. I turned on my side and reached for the small wooden drawer beside the bed. It stuck a little when I pulled it open. Inside were things I never talked about, not because they were secrets, but because no one ever asked. There was an old envelope, yellowed at the edges, a hospital bracelet with my wife's name on it, and beneath them, a folded document I had promised myself not to look at until the right time. I hadn't planned for that time to be now. I met my wife when we were both poor and young enough to believe love could fix everything. We married with nothing but borrowed chairs and a cake my sister baked herself. When our son was born, I held him like glass, terrified I might drop the only good thing I'd ever made. Life didn't get easier, it got heavier. When he was 6, I sold my watch, the only thing my father ever gave me so I could pay for his school books. When he was 12, I skipped meals so he wouldn't notice how close we were to losing the house. When he was 17 and got accepted into college, I smiled proudly while wondering how I would afford it. That was the year my wife got sick. Doctors used words that sounded gentle but weren't. Treatments were expensive. I worked longer hours. I smiled less. I told my son everything was fine because I didn't want him to carry adult worries on young shoulders. The night she died, she held my hand and whispered, "Promise me he'll never struggle the way we did." I promised. Promises have a way of costing more than we expect. After the funeral, bills arrived like clockwork. Medical costs, loans, notices. I could have asked my son to quit school. I could have told him the truth, but I remembered my promise. So I made a decision no father should ever have to explain. I sold the land my grandfather left me, the land that would later become worth more than I could imagine. I put the money into an account under my son's name, told him it was a scholarship opportunity mixed with savings. He never questioned it. Why would he? Parents are supposed to give, not explain. Years passed, he graduated, married, built a life. I downsized quietly. When he invited me to his wedding, I sat in the back row because I didn't want to embarrass him with my old suit. When his first child was born, I held the baby and felt proud and distant, like someone watching their own life through glass. Then the visits stopped coming as often. Then the calls shortened. Then his wife started answering instead of him. And now this. I folded the document back into the drawer but didn't close it yet. My hands trembled, not from age, but from clarity. They thought I had nothing because I asked for nothing. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought Christmas without me would be easier. I stood up and walked to the mirror. An old man stared back at me, wrinkles, white hair, tired eyes. But those eyes still held something sharp. Resolve. If they didn't want me to come for Christmas, I wouldn't. But Christmas had a way of arriving anyway. And when it did, it wouldn't come wrapped in decorations or apologies. It would come with truth. And truth, once opened, cannot be returned. The next morning, the sun came up like nothing had happened. That's the cruel thing about life. It keeps moving even when something inside you has stopped. I made myself a simple breakfast, toast, no butter, because old habits die hard. The radio played a cheerful Christmas song, and I turned it off halfway through. I wasn't ready for joy that didn't belong to me. I sat at the small table and stared at the phone. Part of me expected it to ring again, an apology, a change of heart. Something to tell me the call from last night had been a mistake. It didn't ring, so I picked it up myself. I scrolled through my contacts and stopped at a name I hadn't called in years. A man who once owed me nothing, yet remembered everything. My late wife used to say, "If the world forgets you, there will always be one person who doesn't." She was right. He answered on the second ring. "Is this you?" he asked, surprised. "It is," I said. "I hope I'm not calling too early." For a moment there was silence, then his voice softened. "I was wondering when you'd finally call." We spoke for a long time, not about my son, not about Christmas. We talked about the past, work loss, the way time humbles even the strongest men. I didn't explain why I was calling. I didn't need to. At the end, I asked him one simple question. "Is it still valid?" He didn't ask what I meant. "Yes," he said, "it always was, and it's grown more than you realize." After the call, I felt lighter, not happy, not relieved, just certain. Certainty is rare at my age. That afternoon, I took out a box from the back of the closet. Inside were letters I never sent, birthday cards with no addresses, a small red sweater I bought for a grandchild I barely knew. I folded each item carefully, then placed them back. Some things are meant to be kept, not delivered. Outside, neighbors were putting up decorations. Children laughed. Families planned dinners. I watched from the porch, unseen, like a ghost of a life I once belonged to. A woman across the street waved. "Merry Christmas," she called. I waved back and smiled. "Merry Christmas," I replied. It wasn't a lie. That evening I wrote a letter, just one page, no anger, no accusations, no explanations. I sealed it and placed it on the table where I could see it. I wouldn't send it yet. Because sometimes the strongest response isn't words. It's timing. As night fell, snow returned, thicker now, covering footprints before anyone could follow them back. I stood by the window and whispered to the quiet room, "You taught me well, son. You taught me how to wait." And when Christmas morning arrived, I would do exactly what I was told. I wouldn't come, but the truth would. And it would arrive right on time. Christmas Eve arrived without asking permission. The house smelled the same as always, old wood, dust, and memories, but the silence felt heavier, like it knew what day it was. I woke up early, as I always did, and sat at the edge of the bed for a long moment, letting my joints remind me I was still here. I brewed coffee I didn't really want and wrapped my hands around the warm cup, more for comfort than taste. Outside, the world looked peaceful. Snow rested on rooftops like forgiveness, hiding what lay underneath. I thought about the Christmases that came before. The year my son was 5, when I couldn't afford a tree, so I cut branches from the backyard and tied them together. He'd laughed like it was the best thing in the world. The year I worked a double shift on Christmas Day and came home exhausted, only to find him asleep on the couch waiting for me. Those memories hurt now, not because they were bad, but because they were proof. Proof that love had once been enough. Around noon, my phone buzzed. For a moment, my heart betrayed me and jumped, but it wasn't my son. It was a message from an unfamiliar number. "Everything is set whenever you're ready." I typed back 2 words. "Tomorrow morning." I placed the phone face down and leaned back in my chair. My hands were steady. That surprised me. Fear had already come and gone. What remained was calm. As evening approached, I took the letter from the table and read it one last time. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear. I didn't change a thing. Some truths don't need editing. I slipped the letter into an envelope and wrote his name on the front. Just his name, no titles, no distance. A father's handwriting has its own authority. Across town, my son was probably laughing, eating, sitting beside the woman who had decided an old man was inconvenient. I wondered if he thought of me at all, or if I had already become a quiet absence. I didn't resent him. That surprised me too. Because resentment requires energy, and I had learned to conserve mine for what mattered. Before bed, I laid out my clothes, simple, clean, the same suit I wore to my wife's funeral, not because it was sad, but because it reminded me who I was when everything was stripped away. I slept deeply that night. No dreams, no regrets. Just rest. Christmas morning came softly. No alarms, no voices, just light pushing its way through the curtains. I dressed slowly, carefully, like this moment deserved respect. When I picked up the envelope, my hand lingered on it. "All right," I whispered, "it's time." I stepped outside into the cold air, breath visible, heart steady. I wasn't going to my son's house. I was keeping my word. And yet, somehow, I knew. This would be the Christmas he would never forget. The car ride was quiet. The driver didn't talk much, and I appreciated that. At my age, silence feels earned. We passed streets lined with decorations, families unloading gifts, children bouncing with excitement. I watched it all through the window, not with jealousy, but with distance, like someone who had already lived that chapter. When the car finally stopped, the driver stepped out and opened my door. "We are here, sir," he said respectfully. I looked up at the building in front of me. Tall, modern, clean glass reflecting the pale winter sun. People walked in and out dressed in their best clothes, some carrying folders, others holding phones to their ears. It didn't look like a place meant for old men with quiet lives. But it was exactly where I needed to be. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of polished floors and coffee. A woman at the front desk looked up and smiled. "Good morning," she said. "May I help you?" "Yes," I replied, handing her the envelope. "I'm here to finalize something that's been waiting a long time." She glanced at the name, then looked at me again, this time with recognition. "Of course," she said gently, "they've been expecting you." I was led into a private room, quiet and calm. A man entered shortly after, older than me by a few years, dressed neatly, eyes sharp but kind. We shook hands, the kind of handshake that doesn't need introductions. "You chose Christmas," he said. "It seemed appropriate," I answered. He nodded. "Everything is ready. Once you sign, it can't be undone." I took the pen and held it for a moment. My wife's face crossed my mind, not sad, not worried, just proud. "I know," I said. "I signed." The man gathered the papers and closed the folder carefully, like he was sealing more than ink on paper. "It will take effect immediately," he said. "Notifications will be sent today." "Good," I replied. "That's exactly what I want." As I stood to leave, he hesitated. "May I ask you something?" I looked at him. "Why now?" he asked. "You could have done this years ago." I smiled, small and tired. "Because sometimes," I said, "people need silence before they can hear the truth." Outside, the snow had stopped. The world felt still, like it was holding its breath. On the ride home, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't check it, not yet. Back in my house, I placed my coat on the chair and sat down slowly. For the first time in a long while, the room didn't feel empty. It felt finished. I poured myself a cup of tea and looked at the clock. Late morning. Somewhere else, my son's Christmas was about to change. Not with anger. Not with shouting. Not with revenge. But with consequences. And consequences, unlike people, always arrive. I didn't hear the phone ring. That surprised me. For years I had trained myself to notice every sound, every knock, every buzz, hoping it might be my son. But that morning, after returning home, I was calm enough to let the world make noise without chasing it. It was the second call that finally pulled my attention. The phone vibrated across the table, slow and insistent, like someone who refused to be ignored. I looked at the screen. My son. I let it ring once more before answering. "Dad," he said, and this time his voice wasn't careful, it was shaken. "What did you do?" I sat back in my chair. "I followed your wish," I replied. "I didn't come." "That's not what I mean," he snapped, then stopped himself. "I just got a call from a firm. They said something about accounts, assets, things being frozen, moved, reassigned. I don't even understand it." I closed my eyes for a moment, not out of guilt, but out of exhaustion. "Then you should listen carefully," I said. "Dad, this isn't funny," he continued, panic creeping in. "We were counting on that money. You said it was mine. You said it was for the family." "I said it was for your future," I corrected gently, "not for disrespect." There was silence, heavy, different from before. His wife's voice whispered in the background, sharp, urgent. "What's going on?" she demanded. He covered the phone, but not well enough. "I heard everything." "Dad," he said again, softer now, "can we talk? Maybe you should come over, we can work this out." I smiled sadly. "No," I said, "you were very clear, you didn't want me to come." "Please," he said, "this is serious." "So was your call," I answered. He didn't respond. "Check the email they sent," I added. "Read it carefully, you'll understand." I ended the call before he could say anything else. My hands were still steady. Outside, the sound of distant laughter floated through the air. Somewhere, a family was opening gifts. Somewhere else, a truth was being unwrapped that no one wanted. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. Because for the first time in years, my worth was no longer being measured by how quiet I could stay. It was being measured by what I was finally willing to say. And Christmas wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The email arrived at his house before the food was even served. I didn't see it, of course, but I imagined the moment clearly. My son sitting at the table, phone in hand, his wife already irritated because something had interrupted her perfect Christmas. The children asking why their father looked suddenly pale. The subject line was simple, professional, impossible to ignore. Notice of asset reassignment and trust activation. He opened it, and the life he thought was settled began to shift under his feet. The document explained what I had never said out loud, that the money he believed was his, every account, every investment, every piece of security he planned his future around, was never a gift. It was a trust. A trust created years ago, quietly, legally, and very intentionally. One that named me as the living authority for as long as I breathed. One that existed to support his education, his stability, and yes, his family, but only under one condition. Respect. Not obedience. Not gratitude. Just respect. The moment that condition was broken, the trust didn't disappear. It returned home. The funds were redirected, properties reassigned, access limited, not taken in anger but reclaimed in clarity. Across the city, my phone rang again. I didn't answer this time, because some lessons need to echo before they land. I made myself lunch, simple soup, warm and steady, the kind of food you eat when you don't need comfort, only nourishment. I sat by the window and watched a man shovel snow from his driveway, his son helping clumsily, laughing when they slipped. It reminded me of another winter. My son was 9. He'd fallen hard on the ice and cried, more from surprise than pain. I'd lifted him up, brushed him off, and said, "Stand tall, you're stronger than you think." I wondered if he remembered that. Another call came, this time a voicemail. "Dad, please call me back. We didn't know, we never knew. This wasn't supposed to happen." That last sentence told me everything. This wasn't supposed to happen. No one ever expects consequences to show up on holidays. I finally picked up the phone and typed a message, just one line. Read the letter on the table. Because along with the emails and notices, something else had arrived at his door that morning. An envelope with his name on it, written in a hand he hadn't looked at closely in years. And inside it, not anger, not blame, but the truth he had avoided for far too long. He opened the envelope slowly, not because he was careful, but because his hands were shaking. The paper inside was plain, no letterhead, no legal language, just my handwriting, uneven from age but clear enough to be understood. He had seen it 1,000 times before, on permission slips, birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen table when I worked late. The letter began simply, "My son, if you are reading this, then Christmas did not go the way you expected. It didn't for me either." He swallowed hard and kept reading. "I want you to know first that this was never meant to punish you. A father doesn't stop loving his child because of distance or silence, but love without respect slowly turns into something painful." I imagined him pausing there, maybe looking up, maybe realizing that I had known more than I ever said. "I gave you everything I could while asking for almost nothing, not because I was weak, but because I believed you would remember where you came from. Somewhere along the way, I became inconvenient, and instead of speaking to me, you chose to remove me." The room must have been quiet then. Too quiet for a house full of people. I did not raise you to discard people when life becomes comfortable, and I did not sacrifice my youth, my health, and my future to be treated like a problem to manage. I folded my hands in my lap at home, feeling the weight of those words even now. "You told me not to come this Christmas." I agreed, not because it didn't hurt, but because sometimes stepping away is the only way to be seen. He reached the final lines. The trust was always meant to protect you, not excuse you. I am still your father. I am not your burden. When you are ready to remember that, you know where to find me. Signed, Dad. No anger. No threats. No demands. Just truth. I could picture him sitting there, letter in hand, children waiting for gifts, his wife watching his face change in a way she couldn't control. Because money can be replaced. But the quiet realization that you failed the person who loved you first. That stays. At home, I set the kettle back on the stove and waited. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for an apology. I was waiting for understanding. And Christmas still had one more moment left. One that would decide everything. The knock on my door came just after sunset. Not a polite knock. Not a hesitant one. It was rushed, uneven, the sound of someone who had driven too fast, thought too much, and arrived with a heart heavier than their hands. I didn't jump. I didn't rush. I stood up slowly, straightened my sweater, and walked to the door like a man who had already made peace with whatever stood on the other side. When I opened it, my son was there. No smile. No coat buttoned properly. Eyes red, not from the cold. Dad, he said, and for the first time in years, his voice cracked the way it did when he was a boy. I stepped aside. Come in, I said. He walked into the living room and stopped like he didn't recognize it, like he'd forgotten how small it was, how quiet, how little space there was for pride here. He looked around, then at me. You've been living like this, he asked softly. Yes, I replied, for a long time. He sat down slowly, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. The silence between us wasn't angry anymore. It was heavy with things that should have been said years ago. I didn't know, he whispered. You didn't ask, I said gently. He nodded once, hard. My wife, he started, then stopped. No, that's not fair. I let it happen. I let you become optional. That word hung in the air. Optional. I sat across from him. I never needed to be central, I said. I just needed to matter. His shoulders shook. He wiped his face quickly, embarrassed, like men often are when they realize strength includes tears. When you didn't argue, he said, when you said okay, I thought you didn't care. I smiled sadly. That's when I cared the most. He looked up at me then, really looked, and I saw it, not guilt, not fear. Recognition. I don't want the money, he said quickly. I don't care about the trust, his voice broke. I don't want to lose you. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. You never lost me, I said. You just stopped walking in my direction. We sat there as the clock ticked. Outside, snow began to fall again, quiet and steady, like it had all along. I told them I was coming here, he said after a moment. I told my wife this conversation wasn't negotiable. I nodded. That's a start. He stood, unsure, then stepped forward and hugged me. Not tightly. Not dramatically. Just honestly. And for the first time in many years, I felt like a father again, not a problem to be solved, but a presence to be respected. Christmas night passed quietly after that, no gifts, no speeches. Just two men sitting together, letting silence heal what words couldn't. But the story wasn't over yet. Because forgiveness, like respect, has conditions. And morning was coming. Morning arrived quietly. No alarms, no rushing, just the pale winter light slipping through the curtains like it was asking permission to enter. I woke up in my chair, a blanket over my shoulders. My son was still there, asleep on the couch, his jacket folded neatly beside him like he didn't want to take up too much space. I watched him for a moment. He looked younger when he slept, less guarded, like the boy who once trusted me to fix everything. I stood carefully and went to the kitchen, made tea, 2 cups this time. When he woke up, confused at first, he looked around like he wasn't sure where he was. Then he remembered. "Dad," he said softly. I handed him a cup. "Sit," I said, "drink. We don't make big decisions on empty stomachs." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that doesn't pretend. "I talked to my wife last night," he said after a moment. "Really talked. For the first time, I didn't choose the easy silence." I nodded. "And?" "She didn't like it," he admitted, "but she listened, and for once I didn't apologize for caring about you. That mattered more to me than any apology." "I don't need you to choose between us," I said. "I only need you to choose what kind of man you are." He looked down at his hands. "I forgot that respect isn't something you earn once," he said. "It's something you practice." I smiled. "Now you're learning." Later that morning, he asked a question I knew was coming. "The trust," he said carefully, "what happens now?" I looked at him for a long moment. "That depends," I said, "not on me, but on you." I stood and walked to the drawer beside my bed, took out the same document I'd touched nights ago. I placed it on the table between us. "I didn't take anything away," I said. "I protected it from entitlement, from forgetting, from becoming something that would ruin you." He nodded slowly. "When respect lives in your home again," I continued, "so will everything else, not before." He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He accepted it. That's how I knew he'd changed. By afternoon, he stood at the door, ready to go back to his family. This time, when he hugged me, he held on a second longer. "I'll come get you next week," he said. "Dinner, no negotiations." I smiled. "I'll be ready." When the door closed behind him, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't empty. I sat by the window and watched the snow melt slowly, revealing the ground beneath. Christmas had come and gone. I hadn't gone where I wasn't wanted. Instead, I had stayed where I was needed. And sometimes, the most powerful answer to rejection isn't anger. It's dignity. Before you go, if this story stayed with you, tap like to support the channel and subscribe so you don't miss the next stories. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? I read every one. Because no matter how old we get, respect is still the greatest gift we can give or receive.